vision in Alexandria that puts youth first, and I think we try to do that, and we're headed in that direction, but I would really love to see youth activities, youth strategies prioritized. And so whenever anything comes up in the city, and I mean, I'm sure a lot of other departments say the same, but I would just love to see that. How is this going to affect youth? Is there something we can do with this plan, whether it's in housing or one of the other departments? How is this going to affect youth, and how can we make things better for youth within this plan? One of the things we would love is to have more of a youth voice, and so we have a ton of boards and commissions and committees, and most of them don't have youth. There's maybe one or two I can think of that have, a youth, like one or two youth that serve on them, but the majority don't. And I realize there's some that, like the bar, that probably wouldn't, the architectural one, that wouldn't lend itself probably to having youth because you need technical expertise. But there's a lot of other ones when you think of some of the ones in recreation, even some of the ones in housing, where I think a youth voice would be great. And we have the skills to train adults to work with youth and train youth to work with adults in these positions. So it would be really great if we could sort of get more board members on board to support us to have youth on their boards and commissions. The youth, really, they are the future. And think back to when you were a youth, and how did you learn all this stuff? Because if you talk to some of the board members, they'll talk about, back when I was like 14 and 15 in high school, I really got into government, or I really got into politics, and that's where it starts. So if we want well-informed young people who are going to be an asset, we have to start young. You have to. And so the voice they lend, they're really creative, and not that adults aren't, but they think outside the box, I think, a little more. And so if you get a youth into the room, they're also very honest. And so sometimes when you have a lot of adults and they've all been doing the same work for years, you tend to get more of a group think. And, I worked with Substance Abuse Prevention Coalition before I became the youth development team leader, and it was often the youth on the board who would put the brakes on something and say, I don't know if that's a really good idea. There aren't youth who are looking at that website, or there aren't youth who are going to use, whatever it is we're talking about. So I'm not sure I'd want to spend a lot of money on it. And I feel like there really are this like voice of logic sometimes that maybe you don't expect it, and it would be great, on the youth end for them to really see, how do these boards function? What does a budget look like? How do they come up with this budget? Why are they spending money on this instead of spending money on something else? So, it really is a win-win. So a couple of years ago, I just happened to be, I think I was at probably like one of the community events where we were handing out information, and I ended up at a table next to the person at the time who worked with the children who were coming into the shelter because their, mothers were being abused. And she just started talking about the need. And, when you hear volunteer opportunity and something clicks for you, and, she mentioned, well, it's this 40-hour training, and then you're expected to volunteer, X number of hours a month. And I was just like, I want to do that, because clearly you're short-staffed, and the downside is when they don't have enough volunteers, they end up having to have staff cover, which means they're getting overtime, which means it's coming out of the budget, and that's money that you can't spend. You can't spend helping other clients because you're having to use it to pay staff to be there. Obviously, it's a secret location because it's an emergency shelter for someone who is, being abused, either physically or verbally. So the services they offer are counseling, they have support groups, they coordinate with like CPS and police and other agencies to help. And the shelter is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the people who are paid staff work Monday through Friday, and then starting Friday overnight through Sunday through 10 p.m., it's staffed by volunteers. So your volunteer duties are basically, they train you to be a staff member. So you take phone calls, you help the residents that live in the shelter, you do, if there's an intake, meaning if someone, physically needs to get checked in, you do that. So, essentially you're serving as a staff member over the weekends. I would love to work with sort of like a grassroots coalition because I want to see what they do from the ground up, and I want to do community work. And I just, I stayed with the city because I loved it, and, it's just so fulfilling. So what I would love to see happen is to increase volunteerism, because we have a ton of really great volunteers, but I would love to have just more volunteers, more diverse pool of volunteers. And we have a volunteer website. Am I allowed to make a little plug? It's alexandriava.gov/volunteer, but it lists, all of these different positions. And so, if I could ask for anything, it's just, Go and look and see if there is in any tiny way you can volunteer. Really, when you talk about like something for everyone, we have volunteer opportunities for everyone.